How do you do? This is me, once again. 2 days ago, I had the chance to attend an event over at Whitman College called a Spirituali-Tea I, and it's a weekly thing, and the topic changes from week to week, and I was invited to talk a little bit about my walk and the subjects that interest me. So we had a chance as a group to talk about interreligious dialogue and religious diversity. One student posed a question that I couldn't really give an answer to. I think she was the lone Baha'i in the class. And, did I just say class? Group. I should say group. She asked me if I could provide a one-sentence definition of religious pluralism. And I told her, rather frankly, no, I can't. And the reason for that is that there exists a pluralism of pluralisms. So it's very, very hard to kind of boil pluralism down to just one thing. What I want to do right now, in just a few minutes, however, is to cover what pluralism could be conceived as and the different kinds of pluralism that are out there. So this is going to be a very quick survey. I may be talking kind of fast, so feel free to take this video and rewind it and listen to it again and see if you can kind of deal with the ideas that are coming out here. These are not my ideas, by the way. I'm not a very creative thinker in this area. Okay, pluralism. First off, we should note that pluralism is usually used as part of a threefold typology that was developed by John Hick and Alan Race back in the late 1970s or early 1980s. They had these three categories that were supposed to describe religious attitudes toward other religions. And one was exclusivism, which I think you can figure out pretty quickly. The idea of exclusivism is my way or the highway. My path is correct, other paths are wrong. If you're not on my path, then you're basically hellbound, or you're in error, or you're unenlightened, or something. Another one is inclusivism. Inclusivism is kind of the idea that other people don't need to stop practicing their religion. My religion is probably the straightest path to whatever the goal is or to whatever the ultimate reality is. Other people's traditions are basically imperfect instantiations of that path. So those paths also work, but not quite as well as mine. So a Christian, for example, who is an inclusivist might say, my church basically represents kind of the culmination of spiritual wisdom, and you as a Hindu, well, you can continue to be Hindu because your path also works. It's a little bit more difficult for you because there's no open acknowledgement of the Christ or something, but the Christ dynamic is still working through your religion. So that's inclusivism. At least that's one form of inclusivism. And then there's pluralism. And with pluralism, we have so many different kinds. A while back, I had the chance to read a book. This was in grad school. A book called Explorations in Global Ethics. And the third chapter of that book is written by a woman named Kate McCarthy. And the title of that chapter is Reckoning with Religious Difference. I really recommend that chapter to people. It's a good intro to the whole question of interreligious dialogue, religious diversity, and everything. It's very, very thorough. It's very well done. And unlike a lot of other texts, it actually gives more place to Islam than you usually see. Islam tends to get marginalized in some of these discussions. Anyway, she came up with the terminology of convergent pluralism and non-convergent or divergent pluralism. So, talking about convergent first, this is the classic image that you see in the writing of John Hick, and you hear just as an intuition that a lot of people have, that basically the different religious traditions are different paths that go up to the same mountaintop, to the same summit. And that summit can represent salvation, or it can represent ultimate reality, or something like that. So the idea in this kind of pluralism is to assign sort of equal respect and more or less equal validity to the different paths. So it's different from inclusivism in that sense, because the pluralist here is not saying that the Hindu is necessarily participating in the Christic dynamic. They are oriented toward this summit in some way, this summit that can't really be named even though we give it names. But they're doing it in their own way, and their way is equally legitimate, not a form of Christianity. So convergent pluralism, you hear different images. You know, there's the path going up the mountaintop, or there's the many doors that open into the same room, or you might hear somebody say the different rivers flowing into the same ocean. All ways of talking about pretty much the same thing. There's a convergence there. Well, there's also a kind of pluralism called non-convergent or divergent pluralism. And this kind of arose, I think, as a model that critiques convergent pluralism. And I want to deal later on, in a different video, I want to talk a bit about the critiques of pluralism in general. But for now, I should note that what this concept does is it says, instead of all the different paths converging on one mountaintop, what we have really is maybe everybody starting in a valley and moving up to different mountains in the valley. So the Hindu is really moving along a legitimately Hindu path toward a Hindu salvation. The Christian on a Christian path to a Christian salvation, and so on and so on and so on. And within this particular category, there are different forms. S. Mark Heim is an evangelical Protestant who wrote a book called Salvations, Truth and Difference in Religion. And he talks about something called orientational pluralism. And the idea basically is that it's pluralism all the way up and all the way down. It's totally plural. We start where we start, we end where we end, and the details do matter. You can't just lump it all together and say it's some kind of oneness or some kind of essence or anything like that. It really is different. There's also Stephen Kaplan, who wrote a book called Different Paths, Different Summits. And he approached this from a more philosophical standpoint. He wanted to create some kind of a philosophical paradigm that could accommodate different religious traditions. And so he developed this thing called holographic pluralism, which is a fascinating idea. Ultimately, I'm not sure it works, but it's a really interesting model. The idea here is that a hologram has this kind of implicate order and an explicate order. You've got the laser etching on the actual surface of the hologram, which is going to be the implicate order. But what we see, as we tilt the hologram in different ways, is we see different images that are kind of overlaid onto each other in a dimensional kind of way. Not only that, but a hologram also has the property of showing you the complete image, even when you cut the thing up. So no matter how far you divide it down, it's always going to show you the same thing. The idea here is that he wanted to develop a model that could accommodate, for example, a Buddhist notion of no self and a Christian notion in which you have a soul, a self of some kind or another. These things could be overlaid on each other. Buddhists can move toward their emptiness, and Christians can move toward communion with God. And it's just a matter of where you put your focus, more on the implicate order, more on the explicate order, and how you envision these things relating to each other. Okay, so those are some of the major forms of pluralism out there. We've covered convergent pluralism, and I've just basically given you one classical image for it, everything converging together. And divergent pluralism, which comes in all manner of different forms. There's another kind of pluralism, though. It's a sort of a model-less pluralism, and this is something that is advocated by Raimundo Panikkar, who's a Catholic priest who also is very steeped in his own Indian roots. He's Spanish-Indian, I think, and he has a lot of background in Hinduism and Buddhism and so on. And for him, he feels that models don't work at all. There is no grounding explanatory principle. We can't expect everything to come together in some commensurate sort of manner. It doesn't all have to make sense that way. Instead, he advocates looking at pluralism through the lens of a dialogical dialogue, which is to say we talk to each other, we find out about each other, and the goal of doing that is to continue to talk to each other and find out about each other. It's a conversation for conversation's sake. All right, well, I think that's enough to fill your brain for now, and I will stop right here. Thank you very much.